Far More Than We Think, Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 3. Energy Matters. Much of what we will cover in the following chapters is underpinned by a simple yet crucial scientific understanding that we should explore briefly at the outset. Science tells us unequivocally that physical matter is ultimately comprised of vibrations of energy. My perception of the world used to be based predominantly on what I could physically experience through my senses, but now I see it all as energy. If we view spirituality as some form of non-physical energy, this opens the door to the possible coexistence of physical matter and spirit. It also introduces the idea that everything in the universe is made from the same underlying energy. The variations of physical matter seem to be infinite, yet within every conceivable thing there must be the energy that lies at its source. Most of us have at some time placed a log onto a fire and watched with fascination as it eventually bursts into flame, releasing incredible light and heat. This simple common event holds the key to everything else that we're going to cover, because what we observe here is matter changing into energy in front of our very eyes. Matter and energy are visibly interchangeable. In my mind, matter and energy were two totally separate things, but it turns out this was one of the many misconceptions I had held. Matter and energy are the same thing, just existing in different forms depending on their individual states. A useful way to clarify this idea of interchangeability is to consider the various forms of water that exist in our daily lives. If we take an ice cube out of the freezer and drop it into a saucepan on the stove and apply heat, we already know what will happen. The solid ice will slowly turn into liquid and will then gradually come to a boil and evaporate as steam. If we were to capture the steam, condense it, and place it back in the freezer, it would obviously return to being ice. This example is not intended to demonstrate matter turning into energy, but to show how a substance such as water can exist in different forms depending on its temperature, or, to use another term, subject to its energetic vibration or oscillation. This same concept of apparently different things being composed of the same thing applies to energy and matter. According to Albert Einstein, there is a fixed quantity of energy and matter in the universe, and the two are interchangeable. This interchanging is happening constantly. One glance at the sun tells us that this is so, with the mass of the star being continually converted into light and heat. At the subatomic particle level, each new discovery in particle physics is taking us closer to the inescapable conclusion that the tiny subatomic components of matter are themselves simply vibrations of energy. Also, it's understood that the process of photosynthesis uses the energy of the sun to fuel a chemical reaction, the result of which is a tiny increase in the mass of the elements involved in the conversion. In simple terms, this means the growth of a plant is partly due to the interchanging of the sun's energy into physical matter. So we have matter turning into energy, and we have energy turning into matter, and we have subatomic particles being comprised of vibrations of energy. It's basically all the same thing, just as the different states of water are the same thing. The next point to consider is that matter itself is not what we first imagined it to be. Our classroom chemistry teacher told us that materials are made from chemicals, which are made from molecules, which in turn are made from atoms. These atoms are comprised of a nucleus and numbers of electrons that whiz around the nucleus at great speed. What I didn't fully appreciate until recently was the relative scale of these components. If we were to imagine the nucleus of an atom as a tennis ball and place it in a huge open space, the electrons would be the size of the full stop at the end of this sentence and would be travelling around up to 2 kilometers away. I still find the picture difficult to visualize, but this is the underlying reality of our physical world. Amazingly, it's estimated that atoms are 99.9999% empty space. What we sense and perceive as solid objects are in fact chemical constructions made from spacious atoms, and even the minuscule subatomic particles themselves are just vibrations of energy anyway. Everything is just space and energy. These two ideas regarding energy and matter are difficult for us to accept because our experience in the world does not seem to support them. I still find it difficult to conceive that solid objects are 99.9999% unoccupied space. When I touch something physical, I perceive it to be solid. Yet, in reality, it's not. When I look at my body, it seems real. But it's said that if we stripped out all the empty space in every atom in our bodies, the actual matter remaining would be the size of a pinhead. The solution for me is to imagine that the electrons in the atoms are all moving around so fast that they create the illusion of being in different places at the same time. It's a bit like the propeller on an aircraft that seems to create a circular shape when it rotates quickly, but then reveals just the blade when it slows and stops. We're left with the inescapable truth that solid objects are neither solid nor inert. A lump of rock is simply an underlying energy manifested in physical form, and so too is everything else in the universe, including us. All things move and vibrate in perpetuity. This implies that the physical world as we perceive it is in fact an illusion. The use of the word illusion here is problematic because we instantly reject the notion that our view of the world could be so mistaken. However, the definition of an illusion is an instance of misinterpreted perception of a sensory experience. It's a tough one to grasp, but for me the logic of the scientific explanation is impossible to ignore, and I have to conclude that my perception of the world has hitherto been too narrow. The science behind particle physics is a huge subject in its own right, but for our purpose, all we need to do is recognize and acknowledge that energy and matter are the same thing, existing in different states. Once we appreciate this basic truth, we could quickly see how everything in the universe could be made from the same thing. There's much scientific research underway at this very moment to explore these ideas and theories in more depth. There are also theories of a unified field of energy that I will attempt to explore in a later chapter. The complex physics are way beyond my comprehension, but for me the principle is established. Energy really does matter. All is not as it seems. We are living in a gigantic illusion. The physical world that we experience is instead the universal energy of life expressing itself as matter. It is the energy that matters, and it matters far more than the perceived physical reality of life. The source of all that we experience is energy.